Reach to Teach is a series of 6 online sessions developed at the George Washington University by Professors Heller, Hoffman, and Taragas under a grant from the Department of Defense. Any use of the material in these slides should acknowledge the university, the authors, the granting agency, and the grant number. Session 3 will focus on the pedagogic concept of teaching concepts that go from the concrete to the abstract in your explanation. But before we begin, we really need to talk about the homework from Session 2. Remember, in Session 2, we talked about how you create objectives. Your homework was: think that you are in charge of providing a learning session on network security class about the network stack. Your job was to think of 3 different objectives using different kinds of action verbs. You were to write one that required your students to remember a specific detail, one that required the student to apply what they knew about a network stack, and one objective that would require students to solve a network stack project. How did you do? Here's one. Write one that requires your students to remember an important or specific detail. Did you write something like this? After the completion of this class, a student will be able to report in one short list 4 broad classes of service that a transport protocol can provide. It tells when, it tells who, it tells how much, and about what. I hope you wrote something close to that. Let's look at another one. Here you were to write an objective that requires the student to apply what they know about a network stack. Did you write something like this? After the lesson, a student will be able to write the code that sends video information from one application to another using the correct protocol. Again, when? After the lesson. Who? The student. What? Write code. And how much? What will it do? It'll write the code that works, that sends the video information. Before we go on, we really need to look at the third question. Write one objective that requires the student to resolve a network stack project. Did you write something like this? We should take this entire thing out. We need to talk a little bit about objectives for today's session. Students will be able to explain an open admission policies as relates to community colleges. Now, if you've been paying attention, you know that explain is not the best word here. Perhaps write a definition would have been better. Students will define plagiarism as it relates to student work. Students will develop or obtain a statement about plagiarism for their course syllabus. Now remember, in this case, the students are you, not your students. And students, you, will draft a section of a lesson going from concrete examples to abstract ones. Those are our objectives for today's session. Let's talk a little bit about community colleges. Community colleges have open admission and developmental courses. These are the values of the community college, but they provide a challenge as well. Please review these 2 short videos. I'll wait, and then once you've done that, answer the question to yourself, how do you think your classes in cybersecurity could address the problems raised?
This
Before
is
you
Dr.
take a
Barbara
look
Ballone, and I've been
at the
asked to
video
record
from
a short
Barbara
video
Ballone
on what I
on
wish I would
setting
have known
expectations and the
before my
role of
first day as
ethics
an
in
adjunct
plagiarism,
professor.
take
This
a
occurred when
moment
I was
to
working
think
at a
about
community
any
college. I was actually
experiences
the
that you
director
had
of the Center for Information
regarding or
Technology, but that was
involving
a management
issues with
job.
plagiarism.
Because of that, I was only allowed
Once
to
you've
teach
listened
one
to this
adjunct class per
video
semester.
from
So I was
Barbara,
very excited going into
go
my
ahead
first
and
class.
advance the
I went
slide.
into the class knowing that my students would be from various countries. I was ready for that. What I did not yet know was that there was a whole world of difference between my ethical base and theirs. So, of course, in the first class, there's lots of information to cover. And since the students were going to be responsible for various papers, one of the topics I wanted to cover was plagiarism. I assumed that everyone knew what that was. And what, for my part, I just made my pitch about it not being tolerated and that I would certainly be checking their papers for their sources to make sure that they gave credit where credit was due. It was not until after the first paper was submitted that I realized that there was a very wide gulf between my understanding of plagiarism and theirs. In fact, I had to bring a bunch of students together to talk about this in depth. And during that conversation, some of them even verbalized to me that in their culture, it was considered a compliment to use content from another notable author, but use of citations, not there. No understanding of that. Giving credit to the author, again, not in what they understood to be correct. The giving credit to an author had absolutely no value for those students. So after multiple times of going over this topic, it was really close to the end of the semester before the students understood and knew how to play by the rules in the United States, so as they would be able to give credit where credit was due and not fall into the trap of plagiarism. Unfortunately, a lot of them, their grades suffered, but again, I felt badly about it because they didn't understand plagiarism. I didn't understand that there was a real cultural difference amongst various countries, but now I do. So hopefully you will too. Thanks.
We've come to the meat of today's lesson on going from concrete to abstract. Students, whether it's you or your students, learning progression usually does go from the concrete to the abstract, from the thing as it exists to the abstraction of that thing. Young people learn most readily about things that are tangible and directly accessible to their senses: the visual, the auditory, the tactile, the kinesthetic. And with experience, they grow in their ability to understand abstract concepts, manipulate symbols, reason, and generalize. These skills develop slowly, and they depend, for most people, on a concrete example of new ideas as they go ahead and learn a new topic. For example, you might think about worrying about cybersecurity, and might be hard to explain the concept of security. But people know that they have a door that locks, and they have a pass key to get in, or they have an alarm system, or they have a dog. And if they have all three, that really is the concept of cybersecurity layering. So going from concrete experiences we've learned is a very effective way when they exist in a relative structure. That sounds all pretty fancy. So let's go ahead and look at how that translates to cybersecurity. How do you move from concrete to abstract in a discipline that's inherently abstract, such as computer science or cybersecurity? Thinking about some things that you could describe in the concrete that you could then make an analogy to in the virtual world? Let's try privacy. Privacy. How would we send a message from one person to another so only the person you wanted to view it or receive it could get it? Well, what about a lockbox? Suppose we had a box that only you and the receiver had a key. You could put something in the lockbox and the person could go get it. And since only you and the receiver have a key, you can be pretty sure that the right person and only that person will receive it. And a lockbox and 2 sets of keys is a very concrete example. But let's move a little further. We're going to keep privacy. We want to send an electronic message so only the only the receiver can view it. We could use some sort of password. We could wrap that message up and put a password on it that only the receiver knows. Pretty similar to a lockbox. Better way would be to send an electronic message from one person to another and be confident of encryption, of privacy, would be to use public key encryption. After all, passwords could be guessed. Public key encryption, probably more secure. So you see, we've made a progression from concrete to abstract to even more detailed. How often do you see an explanation like this? Would it be helpful to a first-time learner? I'm not so sure. Well, how about this presentation? Click on the video, examine it. When you've finished watching it, come back and think about how you might have used this one in your community college classroom. So how does one move to the abstract features of a topic? The following video moves from the simple lockbox system to public key encryption. So here's a nice resource that does it for you. It's a wonderful example of going from concrete to abstract. Once you've finished watching the video, come back and move on to the next slide. Well, there's always time for homework. Here's some homework for you. Now remember, you know a lot. You know about creating objectives, and you know about moving from concrete to abstract. You've been hired to teach a course on privacy. You've already covered the elements of secure passwords. What would your next topic be? Outline what you plan to introduce. Use a concrete to abstract technique and prepare a concrete activity and that tie that in to the abstract of the concept. tall order. We've talked a little bit about assessment. Assessment provides feedback to you on how your teaching is going, and provides feedback to the students on how they're progressing. Remember that objectives help you form assessments. Here are some ideas of classroom-based assessments. One where every student responds. Could be that you take a vote. You ask the class, you present a problem to the class, ask them whether they agree or disagree, whether this definition is correct, and let them vote. You could do something called Fists of Five. I think it's really a fun thing, and I'm going to leave it for you to Google, but it's fun. Here's something quite traditional. List 10 things that you've learned. A student will be asked towards the end of the class to list 10 things that came up in today's discussion. My personal feeling is 10's a big amount to come up with, but 3 or 4 or 5 work pretty well. Now, if you're really in the mood to shake up the class, try a beanbag toss. What would you do? A beanbag, a few right answers on the floor, and have students pitch that beanbag to the right answer. 3 facts and a lie. Now that's an interesting thing. Suppose you listed 3 correct answers and 1 not correct, but really hard to discern why it isn't correct, and have the students identify the 3 facts and a lie. What about think, pair, share? In a think, pair, share assessment, students would be given something to consider, such as why a lockbox would protect someone's privacy, or you would be sure that a message got to the right person with a lockbox. Think about it, and then pair with their neighbor to discuss their answers. And then some groups, not all the groups, not all the partners, would share their understanding with the class. Some students are visual learners, and while think, pair, share is more an auditory learner, concept maps and graphic organizers are very visual. A student might be asked as an assessment to draw the concepts of today's lesson and put them in some organized way to show which leads to which, or which is at the same level as which. But a good concept map look.
Joke. By all means, joke.
Go,
Joke as much as you can during the, well, only if it comes natural. Don't overdo it, but, you know, try to sneak a joke here and there. Talk about events that are going on in the world so that they know you're a person, that you're approachable, and you're funny. And when you tell a joke, if somebody was distracted, next time they will pay attention because they want to know what the joke is all about. Maybe not for the homework, but for the joke.
Once you've listened to Paula, click and advance the slide. And references for today's lecture. Oops,